I sat in my car outside the bar, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. There was a strange pull that led me here, though it wasn't a place I'd usually go. The evening had started like any other, an exhausting day at work and the thought of unwinding with a drink before heading home. But something about tonight felt different, as if fate was pushing me towards something I wasn't ready to face. When I finally opened the door and stepped inside, the dim lighting and chatter of strangers hit me like any other bar. But within seconds, I froze in place, my breath caught in my throat. There she was, Emily, my wife, sitting in a corner booth with a man I didn't recognize. At first, I told myself it couldn't be her. Maybe it was someone who just looked like her. But as I stepped further in, there was no mistaking it. Her hair, her laugh, the way she tilted her head, it was her. And the man sitting across from her? He wasn't just a friend. Their knees were touching under the table, and she was leaning toward him in a way that screamed intimacy. The kind of intimacy I hadn't seen from her in years. It felt like someone had punched me in the chest. My legs felt weak, but somehow I managed to stand there, watching them. My mind raced with questions. Who is he? How long has this been going on? What the hell is happening? But when she reached across the table and brushed his hand with hers, I knew. There was no room for doubt. I could have marched over right then and caused a scene, demanded answers, shouted at her, or maybe even thrown a punch at him. But I didn't. Instead, I walked to the bar, took a seat, and ordered a whiskey. The bartender gave me a quick glance, probably picking up on the storm brewing inside me, but he didn't say anything. I sat there, gripping my glass like it was the only thing holding me together, my eyes glued to the two of them. The man wasn't anything special, at least, not to me. He had a smugness about him, like he knew he could get away with whatever he wanted. And Emily? She looked different. There was a glow about her, a lightness I hadn't seen in years. It was like she was a completely different person, laughing with him, leaning closer, wearing that dress. The same dress I bought her on our last anniversary. She told me she was saving it for a special occasion. I guess this was it. Every laugh, every touch between them felt like a dagger to my chest. My mind flashed back to the past few months, how she'd been distant, cold, always glued to her phone. Anytime I'd ask her what was wrong, she'd snap back with something dismissive. "You're imagining things, Ryan," she'd say. Or worse, she'd accuse me of being paranoid, of not trusting her. And like a fool, I believed her. Because that's what marriage is supposed to be, right? Trust. But now, sitting at that bar, all the pieces fell into place. The late nights at work, the sudden need for girls' nights, the way she'd been avoiding any real conversation with me. I felt like the biggest idiot in the world. I don't know how long I sat there, watching them. 5 minutes? 10? It felt like an eternity. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I drained my whiskey, set the glass down, and stood up. My heart was pounding as I walked over to their table, each step heavier than the last. Emily saw me first. Her smile froze mid-laugh, and her face turned pale. The man looked confused at first, glancing between us as if trying to figure out who I was. Then, realization dawned, and that smug look returned. He didn't say a word, just leaned back in his seat like he was waiting to see what I'd do. "Emily," I said, my voice low but steady. "Ryan!" Her voice trembled, and I could see her scrambling for an explanation. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I repeated, my tone sharp enough to cut glass. "That's funny. I was just about to ask you the same thing." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her eyes darted to the man, then back to me, as if searching for some kind of escape. But there was none. I reached down, pulled off my wedding ring, and held it up for her to see. Then, without a word, I squeezed it so hard it dug into my palm before setting it on the table between them. "Congratulations," I said, my voice dripping with bitterness. "You're free." And just like that, I turned and walked away. I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't care what she had to say. My chest felt like it was on fire. My hands were shaking, and I could barely see straight as I made my way to the parking lot. Once I was inside my car, The weight of it all came crashing down. My wife. The woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. She wasn't just unfaithful. She'd been lying to my face for God knows how long. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel as tears rolled down my face. I felt humiliated, betrayed, like everything I'd built was crumbling around me. But beneath the heartbreak, something else was bubbling up. Anger. Not just at her, but at myself, for trusting her, for ignoring the signs, for letting it get this far. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Little did Emily know, that was just the beginning. As I drove home, my mind raced with thoughts I couldn't control. I replayed the scene at the bar over and over, analyzing every detail. Her face when she saw me, pale, guilty, and shocked. The way the guy smirked, as if he'd already won some unspoken battle. The sound of my own voice trembling with rage as I put the ring on the table. Every moment carved itself into my memory like a scar I'd carry forever. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my tears had dried, replaced by a burning anger. I stepped into the house, a place that had once felt like home but now felt hollow. Every photo on the walls, every piece of furniture, every little trinket we'd picked out together, it all mocked me. This was the life we built, and she was willing to throw it away for some guy in a cheap suit. I went straight to the bedroom. Her perfume lingered in the air, and it made my stomach churn. I opened the closet and saw her neatly arranged clothes, her shoes lined up like soldiers. For a moment, I thought about grabbing her things and throwing them out onto the lawn, but I stopped myself. That would be too easy, too predictable. Instead, I grabbed a suitcase from the top shelf and set it on the bed. I didn't know what I was doing yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me anymore. I sat down and pulled out my phone. It was late, but I didn't care. I called my best friend, Mark. He picked up on the second ring. Ryan? What's going on, man? It's late. She's cheating, Mark. The words came out like venom, and saying them out loud made it feel even more real. I caught her at a bar with some guy. They were all over each other. There was silence on the other end, then a deep sigh. Jesus, Ryan, are you sure? I mean, maybe it's not what it looked like. Oh, it's exactly what it looked like, I snapped. You should have seen her face when she saw me. She couldn't even come up with a lie fast enough. Damn, he muttered. I'm so sorry, man. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I'm not going to sit around and wait for her to come home and pretend nothing happened. Mark paused. Do you think it's been going on for a while? I clenched my jaw, my mind flashing back to the late nights, the sudden disinterest in spending time together, the constant texting. Yeah, I said finally. I think it has. We talked for a while longer, Mark offering support while I tried to make sense of everything. By the time I hung up, I felt slightly more grounded. Not better, but like I had a clearer picture of what needed to happen next. It was close to midnight when Emily finally came home. I heard the sound of her car pulling into the driveway, then the soft click of the front door. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited in the living room, my hands gripping the arms of the chair. She didn't see me at first as she slipped off her shoes and set her purse down on the table. When she finally looked up and saw me, she froze. Ryan, she said, her voice strained. You're still up? I am, I said evenly. Waiting for you. She hesitated, glancing toward the stairs as if she could somehow escape this conversation. It's late. Can we do this tomorrow? No, I said sharply, standing up. We're doing this now. Her eyes darted around the room, like a cornered animal searching for an exit. Ryan, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't, I interrupted, my voice cold. Don't insult me by pretending you don't know what I'm talking about. Her face hardened. Fine. You want to talk? Let's talk. Who is he? I demanded. How long has it been going on? She crossed her arms, her posture defensive. You're overreacting. He's just a friend. I let out a bitter laugh. A friend? Is that what you call holding hands and flirting in public? Wearing the dress I bought you for our anniversary while you're out with another man? Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't back down. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is, I shouted, my anger finally boiling over. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my wife is having an affair. She looked away, refusing to meet my gaze. It's complicated, she muttered. Complicated? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. You're married. To me. There's nothing complicated about that. She stayed silent, and for a moment, I thought she might actually apologize, might show some sign of regret. But instead, she did something that made my blood run cold. She smirked. You know what, Ryan? She said, her tone icy. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. I stared at her, stunned. Are you seriously trying to blame this on me? She shrugged, her expression unapologetic. I'm just saying, maybe you're not as perfect as you think you are. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The audacity, the sheer gall of her words left me speechless. Finally, I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This isn't over, I said quietly. You might think you can throw away everything we've built without consequences, but you're wrong. She rolled her eyes. Oh, please, don't make this into some dramatic revenge plot. You're not that guy. Maybe I wasn't, I said, meeting her gaze. But you've changed that. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there with that smug expression on her face. My mind was already racing with plans, with the next steps I needed to take. Because if she thought I was going to let her walk all over me and get away with it, she had another thing coming. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, the weight of what had happened hit me like a freight train. I woke up on the couch, my back aching, and the events of the previous night came flooding back. Emily was nowhere to be seen, but I could hear her upstairs, moving around as if nothing had happened. The audacity of it all churned my stomach. I got up, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at myself in the bathroom mirror. I looked terrible, dark circles under my eyes, my face pale and drawn. The man staring back at me wasn't the same guy from a week ago, a month ago, or even last year. I had let everything slip. My happiness, my self-respect, my ability to see what was right in front of me. Emily came down the stairs as I was pouring coffee. She looked at me but didn't say a word. She just grabbed a mug and stood at the counter, scrolling through her phone. I couldn't believe how calm she seemed, as if our marriage hadn't just imploded the night before. We need to talk, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. She didn't look up. I already told you everything last night. No, I said, my tone firm. You dodged every question and tried to blame me. That's not going to fly. She sighed dramatically and set her phone down. Fine, Ryan. What do you want to know? For starters, who is he? I asked, crossing my arms. And how long has this been going on? She hesitated, her eyes darting to the side before meeting mine. His name is Brandon. We met at work a few months ago. A few months? I repeated, my voice rising. You've been sneaking around for months? It wasn't like that at first, she said defensively. We were just talking, and then, don't, I interrupted, slamming my hand on the counter. Don't try to sugarcoat this. You lied to me. You betrayed me. Emily rolled her eyes, that same infuriating smirk creeping onto her face. Ryan, things between us haven't been good for a while. You're always so boring. Predictable. I needed something different. Her words hit me like a slap. Boring. Predictable. That's what she thought of me. The man who had worked overtime to make sure we could afford our house. The man who planned every anniversary, every special moment, only to be dismissed as if I was nothing. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. If that's how you feel, then why didn't you just leave? Why sneak around like a coward? She shrugged. Maybe I wasn't ready. Maybe I didn't want to deal with the drama. The drama? I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. Emily, you created the drama. She didn't respond, just picked up her phone and started scrolling again, as if the conversation bored her. I felt my blood boiling. It was clear she didn't care about the damage she'd done, didn't care about me, didn't care about us. This isn't over, I said quietly, my voice trembling with anger. She glanced up at me, her expression smug. Do whatever you need to do, Ryan. I'm not stopping you. I stared at her for a moment, a mixture of heartbreak and rage coursing through me. Then I turned and walked out of the kitchen, her words echoing in my head. Do whatever you need to do. Oh, I would. She had no idea what was coming. I couldn't let it end with her smug dismissal. Every fiber of my being screamed that I deserved answers, justice, something to make sense of the betrayal. Emily's calm demeanor, her complete lack of remorse, only fueled my determination to uncover the truth. If she wasn't going to tell me everything, I'd find out myself. That morning, while she was still upstairs, I started going through her things. It felt wrong, like crossing a line, but at the same time, I reminded myself she had already shattered every boundary of trust in our marriage. Her laptop was on the kitchen counter, and when I opened it, I saw she hadn't even bothered to log out. Arrogance or carelessness, I wasn't sure, but it worked in my favor. Her email was the first place I looked. Most of it seemed normal, work-related messages, random newsletters, but buried in the middle of her inbox was a chain of emails with a name that stood out, Brandon. My stomach twisted as I clicked on them. The emails confirmed everything. They'd been exchanging messages for months, first casually, then increasingly flirtatious, and finally explicit. Reading them felt like pouring acid on an open wound. She had written things to him that she hadn't said to me in years, things I didn't even think she was capable of anymore. The worst part was the way she talked about me, describing me as dull, predictable, and oblivious. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking, but I wasn't done yet. I grabbed her phone from where she'd left it charging in the living room. Her passcode hadn't changed, another careless mistake. I went straight to her text messages, and there they were. Hundreds of messages between her and Brandon, some from just a few hours ago. One in particular stood out. Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you. When can we see each other again? Last night, while I'd been sitting in my car, crying, trying to figure out what to do with my life, she'd been planning her next meeting with him. My chest tightened as I scrolled further, each message like a dagger in my heart. They talked about everything. How much they enjoyed each other's company, their plans for the future, even jokes about how clueless I was. It was more than I could take. I copied everything. Screenshots, emails, messages, all of it. If this was going to end in a divorce, I wanted to be ready. Emily had made it clear she had no respect for me or our marriage, and I wasn't about to let her walk away without consequences. By the time she came downstairs, I had put everything back in its place. She didn't even look at me as she grabbed her purse and keys. "I'm going out," she said flatly. "Where to?" I asked, though I already knew. "Just running errands," she replied, avoiding my gaze. She didn't even try to hide the lie. "Sure," I said, my voice calm. "Take your time." She paused for a moment, as if waiting for me to say more, but when I didn't, she shrugged and walked out the door. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my phone and dialed Mark. "Ryan," he said when he picked up. "You okay?" "No," I admitted, "but I need your help." "Anything," he said immediately. "What's going on?" "I need to hire a private investigator," I said. "I need to know everything, where she goes, who she's with, all of it." Mark hesitated. "Are you sure about this? It's a big step." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "She's not telling me the whole truth, and I need to protect myself. If this goes to court, I want all the proof I can get." "All right," Mark said. "I know a guy. I'll send you his contact info." "Thanks, man," I said, my voice heavy. "I appreciate it." After we hung up, I sat in the silence of the house, my mind spinning. Emily thought she was in control, that she could lie and cheat without consequences. But she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her destroy my life without a fight. This wasn't over. Not even close. 2 days later, I sat in a small, dimly lit office across from the private investigator Mark recommended. His name was Tony, a no-nonsense guy with sharp eyes that seemed to size me up the second I walked in. His office was bare except for a desk, a filing cabinet, and a coffee machine that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. "So, Ryan," Tony said, leaning back in his chair, "you want me to follow your wife?" "Yeah," I said, sliding the envelope of cash across the desk. I need to know everything. Where she goes, who she's with, and for how long. Tony nodded, counting the bills with practiced ease. Any idea where she might be meeting him? Work? Hotels? She said she met him at work, I replied, my stomach churning at the thought. But I don't know where they meet now. She's been coming home late, saying she's out with friends or running errands. It's all lies. Got it, Tony said, jotting down notes. I'll start tailing her tomorrow. Shouldn't take long to get what you need. As I left his office, I felt a mix of relief and dread. Part of me hoped Tony wouldn't find anything, that maybe this was all some horrible misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew better. Emily had already proven who she was, and now it was only a matter of getting the proof to confront her on my terms. Over the next few days, Emily's behavior didn't change. She still acted cold and dismissive, barely acknowledging me when she was home. On Friday evening, she left the house around 7 p.m., saying she was meeting a coworker for dinner. I didn't ask any questions. I just nodded and watched her drive away, knowing Tony was already on her trail. The waiting was unbearable. I sat on the couch, my phone in hand, staring at it like it might explode. Around midnight, Tony called. Ryan, I've got something, he said, his voice low. You're going to want to see this. The next morning, I met Tony at a diner on the edge of town. He handed me a manila envelope, his expression grim. I followed her last night. She wasn't meeting a coworker, that's for sure. I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of photos. My heart sank as I flipped through them. There she was, Emily, sitting in a booth at a restaurant with Brandon. They were laughing, holding hands, and at one point, she leaned across the table to kiss him. It didn't end there, Tony said, sliding another set of photos toward me. These were taken outside a motel. Emily and Brandon were standing by his car, their bodies close, his hand on her waist. Then, they disappeared inside together. The timestamp on the photo read 10:37 p.m. I couldn't look at them anymore. I shoved the photos back into the envelope and clenched my fists, trying to keep my emotions in check. How long were they there? I asked through gritted teeth. Couple of hours, Tony said. He dropped her off at home around 1 a.m. I nodded, my jaw tight. Thanks, Tony. I'll let you know if I need anything else. He gave me a sympathetic look. Sorry, man. I've seen this kind of thing before, and it never gets easier. I left the diner feeling like my chest was caving in. The photos were undeniable proof of her betrayal, but instead of feeling vindicated, I felt sick. Seeing her with him, so carefree and happy, while I was left picking up the pieces, it was a pain I wouldn't wish on anyone. When I got home, Emily was sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I walked in, giving me that same dismissive glance she always did now. You're back, she said, her tone indifferent. Where were you? Out, I replied shortly, heading for the stairs. Out where? She pressed, her voice tinged with annoyance. I stopped and turned to face her. Funny, I said, my voice icy. I could ask you the same thing about last night. Her face twitched, but she quickly masked it. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said, stepping closer, that I know where you were. I know who you were with. And I know exactly what you've been doing. Her eyes widened, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of fear. Ryan, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't, I snapped, my voice rising. Don't lie to me, Emily. I have proof. Photos, timestamps, everything. She stood up, her posture defensive. You had me followed? You left me no choice, I said coldly. You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around, making a fool out of me. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Her face flushed with anger. You're unbelievable. Spying on me? That's pathetic, Ryan. Pathetic? I repeated, my voice shaking. You want to talk about pathetic? How about cheating on your husband and sneaking off to motels with your boyfriend? She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For once, she didn't have a smug comeback. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. I knew this was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like I was in control. This time, it was her turn to feel the weight of what she'd done. The silence in the house was suffocating. After our explosive argument, Emily retreated upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stayed downstairs, pacing the living room, my thoughts spinning. The anger was still there, burning beneath the surface, but now it was mixed with something else, exhaustion. I was drained from carrying this weight, from constantly trying to piece together what went wrong. By the next morning, I decided it was time for a real conversation, one where Emily couldn't dodge or deflect. If she was going to wreck our marriage, then I deserved to hear the truth from her lips. No more excuses, no more lies. I found her in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling on her phone as if nothing had happened. It was infuriating. How she could carry on with her life so nonchalantly while mine was falling apart. I walked in and sat across from her, setting the manila envelope of evidence on the table between us. She glanced at it, her expression hardening. "What's this supposed to be?" "Open it," I said flatly. She hesitated, then reached for the envelope. As she pulled out the photos, her face went pale. She flipped through them quickly, her breathing growing shallow. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes narrowing. "You really did have me followed. I told you I wasn't going to let this slide," I said. "Now, tell me the truth. How long has this been going on?" Emily threw the photos onto the table, her face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous, Ryan. You're acting like some kind of detective instead of my husband. Don't turn this on me," I shot back. "You're the one sneaking off to motels with another man. You've been lying to me for months. So don't you dare sit there and act like I'm the problem." She stood up abruptly, crossing her arms. "Fine. You want the truth? Brandon and I have been seeing each other for 6 months. There. Happy now?" "6 months?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "6 months, Emily? Do you have any idea what that's done to me? What that says about you?" She rolled her eyes. "Oh, spare me the theatrics. It's not like our marriage was perfect. You've been checked out for years, Ryan. Checked out." I slammed my hand on the table, making her flinch. "I've been working my ass off to give us a life, to make you happy. And this is how you repay me? Maybe I wouldn't have looked elsewhere if you weren't so boring," she snapped, her voice cutting through me like a knife. "You're predictable, Ryan. You're the same every day. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. There's no excitement, no passion. Brandon gives me what you never could." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. All the sacrifices I'd made, the late nights at work, the missed opportunities to spend time together. It had all been for her, for us. And now, she was throwing it back in my face like none of it mattered. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. You don't get to rewrite history to justify your actions. If you were unhappy, you could have told me. We could have worked on it. But instead, you chose to lie and cheat. That's on you, not me. Emily's expression didn't soften. If anything, she looked even angrier. Maybe I did what I had to do to feel alive again. Maybe this is what I needed. "Then why are you still here?" I asked, my voice low and cold. "If Brandon makes you so happy, why haven't you packed your bags and left?" She hesitated, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or doubt. "Because this is my house too," she said finally, "and I'm not going anywhere." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. I stood up slowly, my eyes locked on hers. "You're right," I said. "This is your house too, but not for much longer." That afternoon, I called a divorce lawyer. I explained everything, her infidelity, the evidence I'd gathered, her refusal to leave. The lawyer listened patiently, then laid out my options. It was going to be a messy process, but I didn't care. I was done letting her call the shots. When I got off the phone, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had a plan. Emily might have destroyed our marriage, but she wasn't going to destroy me. Not anymore. Later that evening, Emily tried to act like nothing had happened. She sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, while I went through my papers in the dining room. The tension was thick, but I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The wheels were already in motion, and soon, she'd realize she was no longer in control. This wasn't over yet, but for the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand, and I wasn't about to let it go. The days that followed felt like walking through a minefield. Emily and I coexisted in the same house, but every interaction was charged with tension. She acted as though nothing had changed, scrolling through her phone, watching TV, making plans with friends. Meanwhile, I was working silently behind the scenes, preparing for what would come next. My lawyer had been clear. I needed to gather every shred of evidence I could to ensure that Emily's infidelity would be undeniable in court. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about protecting myself, my finances, and everything I had worked for. If she thought she could walk away from this unscathed, she was sorely mistaken. One evening, Emily came downstairs as I was finishing dinner. She was dressed up, heels, a sleek black dress, her makeup done just a little too perfectly. It didn't take a genius to figure out where she was going. Heading out? I asked, my voice calm. She glanced at me briefly, her expression indifferent. Yeah, meeting some friends. Friends? I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Anyone I know? Her jaw tightened, but she kept her tone casual. Just some coworkers. Don't wait up. I watched her walk out the door, my blood boiling. She didn't even bother to lie convincingly anymore. But this time, I wasn't just going to sit at home and wait. I grabbed my phone and called Tony. She just left, I said. Follow her. You got it, he replied without hesitation. Hours later, Tony called back, his voice grim. Ryan, she's at the same motel as before. Same guy too. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. Even though I knew what to expect, hearing it confirmed again felt like a fresh wound. Did you get photos? Plenty, Tony said. They've been there for about 2 hours now. Good, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Keep documenting everything. I hung up and stared at the clock on the wall. It was nearly midnight. She wouldn't be home for a while, and I wasn't going to waste the time waiting around. Instead, I opened her laptop and began searching through her emails and files again, this time looking for something specific. Financial records. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Bank statements, credit card charges, invoices, all of it told a story. Dinners at expensive restaurants, hotel bookings, even a few lavish purchases I didn't recognize. She was using our joint account to fund her affair. That was the last straw. Emily came home around 2 a.m., reeking of perfume and wine. She kicked off her heels at the door and walked into the living room, startled to see me sitting there, waiting. Ryan, she said, her voice a mix of annoyance and caution. What are you doing up? I stood up slowly, holding the envelope of evidence Tony had given me, along with the printouts of her financial records. We need to talk. Her face immediately hardened. Not this again. Can't we just— No, I interrupted, my voice sharp. You're going to sit down and listen to what I have to say. Reluctantly, she sat on the couch, crossing her arms. I dropped the envelope on the coffee table, the photos spilling out for her to see. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely afraid. I know everything, I said, my tone cold and measured. The motel, the dinners, the gifts. I know where my money has been going. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand to stop her. Don't even try to deny it. I have more than enough proof. For the first time, Emily looked rattled. What do you want me to say, Ryan? That I'm sorry? Fine, I'm sorry. But what's done is done. There's no point dragging this out. No point. I repeated, my voice rising. You've destroyed our marriage, lied to me, stolen from me, and you think you can just brush it off? She stood up, her face red with anger. I've already told you, Ryan. Our marriage was over long before Brandon came into the picture. You just refused to see it. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in my fury. You're right about one thing, I said quietly. Our marriage is over, but you're not walking away from this without consequences. Her eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means I've already filed for divorce, I said, watching the color drain from her face. And it means you won't be getting a dime from me. Not after what you've done. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time, she looked genuinely speechless. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, the weight of her actions finally sinking in. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The war wasn't over yet, but for the first time, I felt like I was winning. Emily thought she could control the narrative, but now, the tables had turned, and I was ready for whatever came next. The next few days were tense, to say the least. Emily had retreated into silence, avoiding me whenever possible. The smugness she once carried was gone, replaced by something colder, calculation. I could see the gears turning in her head as she tried to figure out her next move. But I wasn't going to give her the chance to strike first. The momentum was mine now, and I intended to keep it that way. On Thursday, I met with my lawyer, Linda, to finalize the next steps. She was sharp, relentless, and exactly the kind of person I needed on my side. "You've done well gathering evidence," she said, flipping through the folder of photos, messages, and financial records I'd compiled. "This will make it difficult for her to claim any kind of innocence in court." "What about the finances?" I asked. "She's been using our joint account to fund her affair." Linda nodded. "We'll highlight that too. Judges don't look kindly on marital funds being misused for extramarital affairs. With everything you've shown me, we can push for a favorable settlement. If she fights it, we'll have more than enough to back you up." "Good," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I just want this to be over." "It will be," Linda assured me. "But be prepared. She's likely to lash out when she realizes she's losing." I wasn't surprised by her warning. Emily wasn't the type to go down without a fight. That evening, I decided it was time to deliver the final blow. I waited until Emily came home, her face weary from whatever excuse of a day she'd had. She barely looked at me as she tossed her purse on the couch and headed for the kitchen. "We need to talk," I said, standing in the doorway. Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn around. "What now, Ryan?" "I met with my lawyer today," I said calmly. "The divorce papers are ready." She spun around, her eyes narrowing. "So, that's it? You've already made up your mind?" "You made up my mind for me," I shot back. "The moment you decided our marriage wasn't worth fighting for. The moment you chose someone else over the life we built together." Her lips curled into a bitter smile. "You're so dramatic. It's not like we had some fairy tale marriage. Maybe if you'd been a better husband, enough." I snapped, cutting her off. "I'm done letting you rewrite history to make yourself the victim. You betrayed me, Emily. You lied, cheated, and used me. And now you're going to face the consequences." Her face flushed with anger. "What do you want, Ryan? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. Okay? Happy now?" "No," I said coldly. "An apology doesn't fix this. What I want is for you to pack your things and leave." Her eyes widened. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said, my voice steady. "The house is in my name. You can stay until the paperwork is finalized, but after that, you're out." She crossed her arms, her expression defiant. "You can't just kick me out. I have rights." "You do?" I agreed. "But so do I. And I'm done letting you walk all over me." She glared at me, but for the first time, I saw something new in her eyes, fear. She wasn't in control anymore, and she knew it. The next morning, I left for work feeling lighter than I had in months. The divorce process would be messy, but the worst was behind me. Emily had shown her true colors, and I had no intention of looking back. That evening, when I returned home, I found a note on the kitchen counter. It was short, bitter, and entirely in character for her. "Congratulations, Ryan. You win. I'll be out by the end of the week. Don't expect me to make it easy for you." I stared at the note for a long time, a mix of relief and sadness washing over me. This wasn't how I had envisioned my life turning out, but it was better than staying trapped in a toxic marriage. Emily was right about one thing. I had one, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like survival. By the end of the week, she was gone. The house felt eerily quiet without her, but it was a peaceful kind of quiet. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I would rebuild. I would find happiness again. And next time, I wouldn't settle for someone who saw me as a stepping stone in their selfish pursuit of excitement. This chapter of my life was over, and despite everything, I was ready to start a new one.